Hi, Steve. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, I notice here that you've got four, maybe even five books, and we're definitely going to talk about that. I'm going to minimize this to get the glare off my face. There we go. And but before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, and what you do, and how you got to the point where you wrote these books?
Well, I'm working now as technology support person. Been working with computers all my life, and I'm a couple of years from retirement. But the writing all started when I was a kid, like uh, good grief, maybe 9 or 10 years old. My mom worked for a printing company, and she would bring home books and magazines for us to read. And one day she brought home a copy of Isaac Asimov's I, Robot. I read that and instantly fell in love with science fiction. And of course, like anybody, not only did I want to read it, I wanted to create it myself. I would I would draw little comic books and write little dumb stories of my own that no one ever read but me. But it was always my dream to write the great American science fiction novel. Well, or just to be creative in general, because few people know that, I was born at the end of the golden age of radio, and I've always wanted to do radio, and not one to give up very easily. I actually built a studio in my apartment and did some radio drama. Maybe we can discuss that later on.
Oh, yeah,
But
I like that.
the novels, again, the primary novel that we'll talk about is the Chronicar. It's a urban adventure in time, and it's told from a Black perspective. But I don't like calling it Black science fiction. I prefer to call it science fiction that happened to Black people because, from my own experience. I mean, if you wrote the same story, it'd be from your experience. And it's been surprisingly popular. People really enjoy it.
Oh, that sounds really amazing. So that's the most recent book of yours?
Well, that's the very first one that I wrote. I followed that up with three others that are all independent. I mean, you can read one without having to read any of the others, but there is an underlying connection and theme. So if you read all four, you'll get more out of it than if you just read any one of them.
Good. I like that. Isaac Asimov. Well, that's
Oh
my
yes.
favorite science fiction writer. Yeah, I love the way he developed characters, and he can place
Hmm.
them anywhere at any time period, and you can relate to them.
Exactly.
Did you pick up some of that for your books? Your characters are very
Well,
relatable.
yeah. Well, I guess I think I just have sort of a knack for doing that. But what I really picked up from Asimov is the concept of starting your story with a little bit of real science and then morphing that into the science fiction. I mean, I've had people come and ask me if the Chronicar was real because, I mean, the story starts off talking about Isaac Newton and things that people have heard of. And then I was able to morph that into the fiction of time travel. And I mean, it works very well. I love that about what Asimov used to do.
Yeah, me too. Well, let's get right to it. Let's start
Mhm.
with what you think would be the first book that needs to be talked about, and you can tell me all about that.
Okay, well, the first book would be The Chronicar, an urban adventure in time. It's a time travel story that starts with the son of a slave. The character is a few years after the Civil War. He's a black man born with the mind of a genius. And of course, back then he had to hide this genius. But he stumbles upon a copy of Isaac Newton's Principia. And being a genius, he's able to read it, understand it, and even memorize it. And he's forced to leave his home. He gets into trouble. I mean, that's almost predictable, and he manages to enroll into the Tuskegee Institute. The only black school he could find. Now he's disappointed to find out that it's not a school of theoretical science. It's all applied sciences. Animal husbandry and agriculture. But in ways that I won't give away, he still manages to get a PhD in physics. And in his studies, he discovers the secret of time travel, designs a time machine that he calls a chronocar, but he can't build one because the technology doesn't exist. So 125 years later, a black student from the Illinois Institute of Technology, that is my alma mater, I base my characters on myself as much as I can, but this kid discovers the doctor's plans, builds a chronocar, and goes back to the year 1919 to visit the doctor to show him his invention. But he doesn't do his homework because he lands there in the middle of the bloodiest race riot in Chicago's history.
Oh.
And this story took me about 3 years to research for the science and for the history.
Hmm.
What's different about it, because there's all of these time travel stories out there. What's different about it is that in the Chronicar, it is truly science fiction more than it is historical fiction. And I try to look at how time travel might really work. I was having a discussion with a friend the other day, and I was explaining how in a lot of time travel stories, the only consequences are how the hero might change events. But
Right.
there should be a consequence to the very act of traveling through time. And that's what the story is really all about. Again, not to give too much of it away, but just traveling through time is a very dangerous thing to do. And the irony is that building a time machine is not that difficult. So, and I guess I was able to get across the science and of it without too much, without confusing people too much, because a lot of people who claim they hate science fiction love the Chronicar.
Hmm. Well, I think time travel is something that even, as you say, people who say they don't like science fiction
Hmm.
are fascinated with. If I can go back and change things, or I would do things differently, it can just start like that. But
Hmm.
time travel is a very intriguing thing. Yeah,
Oh yeah, it is. It is.
yeah.
But there's a reality to it that people don't really think about that I try to address. For example, you've seen The Time Machine, the H.G. Wells book and movie. And one of the things that always bothered me about that is that he is sitting in his machine, he cranks it up, and while he's sitting there, his house is deconstructed and all of that. But if you were to go back in time a couple of hours, you would be where the Earth was 2 hours ago. That's something I've seen no other time travel story actually deal with, if you follow what I'm saying there.
The Earth,
So
the Earth being where it is.
yeah, well, the Earth is moving. I mean, we're
Yeah,
moving through
sure.
space
Right.
so if you
Yeah.
if you go back in time and only go back in time, you will be where the Earth was 2 hours ago,
And how
which
would
is
that
somewhere.
and how would that affect
What
anything?
you'd be in the middle, you'd be somewhere in space.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have
Oh,
a
I see. I see. I
and if
see.
you didn't have a device that had an atmosphere inside, you'd be dead 5 minutes later. So
Right. Right.
there are a lot of little subtleties that most time travel stories just completely ignore.
Never thought about that.
And I wanted to do something different. So there is that, and there's some other things, and maybe we'll talk about some of them here. Again, I don't want to give too much away,
Sure. Sure.
but I do want people to understand that this is a different kind of time travel story.
Oh, you put a lot of thought into this.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely.
So do you explain again without giving it away? Do
Mhm.
you explain some of the scientific technicalities about how the positioning of oneself who's going through time travel ends up being still on planet Earth, regardless of where it happens to be cosmologically?
Well, again, it's all science fiction. What happens when you
Sure.
travel through time? You are automatically transposed to another point in space. And then once the trip is over, your technology knows where the Earth would be, and it
Ah,
puts you where
okay.
you should be. So,
Yeah.
it gets a little complicated, but I mean, you hit
Well,
the button, and all of a sudden you're in space.
well,
And then
even
when it's
so,
done,
even
you end up,
so,
yeah.
even so, it gets complicated. You answer
Hmm.
that question. Oh, first you raise the question,
Hmm.
something that perhaps others have not. And then
Hmm.
you solve the question by giving an answer that you don't need to get into much detail, but
Sure.
you say, no, this machine actually makes those calculations for you, thankfully.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly.
Fascinating. I just learned something new, man. That's really great.
Again, I know no one else has taken this approach. I wanted to write a time travel story that made sense to me.
Yeah.
And there I don't know if you know who Sue Burke is. She's another science fiction writer,
No.
very very celebrated. And she wrote a review of Time Waits for No One, which is the follow-up to the Chronicar. And she said it's the only time travel story she ever read that actually answered all of the paradoxes.
Excellent. Well,
And
good for you.
that was a major compliment to me.
I bet. I bet. So that's your second book that
That's
picks up where the first book left off. Because it's time travel, how many
mhm.
years pass by before the second book starts up?
Well, I'm going to do just a tiny bit of a spoiler. Um, in the theory of time travel with the chronocar, you can only travel in one direction. You can go to the past, but you cannot go to the future because the future doesn't exist yet. The future is all based on causality, what you're doing and what I do. And if those things haven't happened yet, there could be no future. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And when you travel in time, once you turn the machine off, you bring all the time back with you, and time literally restarts from that point. So the chronocar ends at one point. Time waits for no one. Time has resumed. The same character is there, but he's a
Okay.
different person
Okay.
because time has resumed in a different way. Again, it's a
Hmm.
little confusing, without going through the detail. But characters who died in the first one are alive in the second one because they were born again. Not to
Okay.
sound too weird about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
again, it makes sense, and it makes sense in a way that a lot of people can follow it. I don't deal with multiple universes and things like that.
Hmm.
People can't follow that. There is just one timeline, and that's how it works.
Okay. All right. Well, let's hear about that next book without, of course, giving away too much.
Yeah, yeah. Edge of Perception came from kind of a dream that I had. It's a paranormal science fiction love story, and I throughout my life I struggle with the concept of the paranormal. You know, are there spirits? Are there life after death and things like that? And my wife and I were watching this crazy program called Ghost Hunters. These were guys that would go into haunted homes and haunted buildings and try to find spirits. And they were using little devices that supposedly would pick up electromagnetic energy. So what they're saying is that spirits, if they exist, are electromagnetic energy. Bang, there's the science of the paranormal. So in the Edge of Perception, what this guy does, he's a young man who doesn't really believe, even though he's experienced a few things, and he finds himself in a place where he's hired by this group of very wealthy people to build, in effect, a ghost hotel, and to devise a way to make it possible for people to sit in the same room and talk to ghosts. And it's believable to me because it shows a possible physical scientific way to experience the paranormal.
Okay.
Now, some of it is based on my life, and not that I've had any paranormal experiences, but I've known a lot of people who claim to have. People who, why would they lie to me?
Right.
So
Right.
it makes me wonder.
Mhm.
And it's a fun story, and it's
Okay.
very, very different than anything else I've ever written.
Okay. And yet it still relates to the first book. It's just a continuation on.
Well, yeah, because again, I'll give away a few things. The young man builds a device that makes it possible to go into the realm of the spirit, and
Okay.
it turns out to be a chronocard that doesn't work properly. So there is a little bit of a connection.
Okay. Cool. When did you first start writing these books?
Um, Well, the Chronicle was published in 2015. So a couple of years before that, it's when I started doing the research and playing around with it. Been in the back of my head for years.
Yeah.
But I actually went to the library and did the research. I didn't trust the stuff you find on the internet back then. And, I was looking for a historical point to focus on. And I discovered the Red Summer Riots of 1919, which no one had heard of then. A lot of people learned about that riot from my book because until uh, 2019, when they finally had a 100-year anniversary of it, people had not heard of it,
Right.
and which was great. I mean, it made the story all the more fascinating and more interesting. I love it when you can read a book and you think this is interesting, and then you go look it up and realize, well, that part of it is true.
Hmm.
This actually happened, and it makes the fictional part even more fascinating and believable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Now, moving on to, I guess you'd call it your third book. You say all these are related. So, what would be the next book you want to talk about?
Well, the next book is Apocalypse. The digital dystopia is coming. this is actually one of my favorites. It's a techno thriller, and I consider it a techno thriller written for boomers because it deals with AI and all of that stuff. I wrote it like 3 years ago, and the story is about a retired computer guy, which I'm going to be in a couple of years, and he discovers that people are being controlled through their devices, their cell phones, their video games, and whatever, by this master computer system, and it's different. It's done in a different sort of way, and people just love the heck out of it. It is one of my favorites. All of these books are audio books also, and Apocalypse is one of the best of the audio books because of how the guy reads it and creates the characters. And you're dealing with a world where everyone wants to have a self-driving car, but can you trust that self-driving car? You know, the computer system, the master computer system, realizes that my hero is a threat. So now he's being chased by self-driving cars and things of that
Wow.
nature. But it's a lot of fun. And the Chronicar connection is that one of the people who tries to uh, solve the mystery is the bad guy who realizes later that he's done wrong, and he comes back in time with a chronicard to try to fix his mistakes. And this is where it really drives people crazy because the guy comes back in time. He's interacting with himself as a younger man. As a younger man, he dies, but nothing happens to him.
Hmm.
And in the universe of the chronicard, that makes perfect sense. Now, that actually comes up in my final novel. There's a story there where a young man goes back in time to visit his father and he accidentally kills him. But again, nothing happens to him. And that's because when you go back in time, you're starting time over, you're disconnected from the timeline. So why would something happen to you? For you to disappear because you killed your dad is a totally illogical thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
I know it gets kind of weird. If you read the book, it actually makes sense.
Hmm.
But these are the kinds of things, you've seen Back to the Future,
Sure.
and I just couldn't understand, people disappearing from the photograph,
Yeah.
as
Right.
it just didn't make sense. And if it were possible to travel back in time, I don't think, the death of your father would affect you because you're already there.
Yeah.
So, and there are other uh, things that I get into debates with. Like there's the third law of thermodynamics about matter and energy. You can convert back and forth, but you can't create. And
Hmm.
somewhere in there, there's a theory that there is only so much matter and energy in the universe. That's the fixed number. Well, if I go back in time 10 years, now there's a couple of 100 pounds of matter that shouldn't be there. Not only that, it's matter that is already there in some other form or location. There is so much that is illogical about time travel that I personally don't think is possible in terms of getting into a machine and going back to the year 1919.
Yeah.
That would just break so many laws of physics and even logic. I have a problem of even accepting that it's possible. I write about it. I have a great time.
Yeah. I was about to say, you're right
Yeah,
about
but
it.
it's
So,
fiction. It's all science
but you
fiction.
needed to make rules for it
Oh,
that
absolutely.
satisfies you,
Exactly.
and sort of like the rules of robotics for Asimov.
Exactly. Exactly. And because of those rules, if you think about those rules, it just doesn't make sense. Time
Yeah.
travel, as in Back to the Future, just doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
Because if you go back in time, even if you go back before you were born, the matter that your body is made up of still exists somewhere. And again, it's not a duplicate set of atoms or molecules, it's the same matter
Right.
molecule. How does that possibly make sense?
Sure.
And I've never seen anyone even address that in terms of time travel.
Well, I've interviewed quite a few people who have written about time travel, and this is the first time I've heard this version of it.
Yeah, we probably confused everybody in the audience right now, right?
Well, actually, it kind of softens the idea. It makes time travel from the point of view of the book being
Mhm.
fiction more believable. That's what it
Yeah,
does. That's
and I think, yeah, and that works. I mean, it surprised me how many people. My a guy that I work with bought a copy of the book just to support me, and one day he's riding the train and he's reading it, and he gets to the ending. The ending is apparently something that's a big surprise, and he emails me, "Holy crap, I can't believe this!" And I hate science fiction, but he loved the book. And part of that also is that people don't really know what science fiction is too. Um, um, I have a definition that I thought came from Asimov, but I've yet to find where he actually said it. And it's where in science fiction, the science, whether real or imaginary, has to be so central to the story that if you pull it out, the story falls apart. So the Chronicar is about time travel. If you don't have a Chronicar, you don't have a story. But by that same definition, Star Wars is not science fiction. Star Wars is the story of rebels fighting an evil empire. That's what the story's about. It just takes place in outer space.
yeah,
It's almost King Arthur. You could tell the same story with metal swords and wooden ships.
sure.
So it's space opera, but not science fiction.
Hmm.
And a lot of people will say they don't like Star Wars, but Star Wars is not science fiction.
I'll have to remember that because I've told people that I wasn't a big fan of Star Wars, and
Mhm.
yet I think I like science fiction.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well,
Mm.
I I like some of the Star Wars movies. The first ones, the latter one. The only movie I ever fell asleep on in my life was a Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
But because I'm a big Star Trek fan. But really, only about half of Star Trek is even really science fiction. A lot
Oh,
of it is space opera. I don't know if you've seen any of the movies. The very first Star Trek movie, the motion picture, was
I'm
pure
sure I
science
did.
fiction.
Yeah, sure I did.
Pure science fiction. The Wrath of Khan is space opera because it's about a man wanting to take revenge on another man for being wrong.
Hmm.
It just takes place in outer space and in spaceships.
Right.
Great movie, but it's not really science fiction.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered four of your books, but there's a fifth one there in your Amazon page. And we talked just briefly earlier, and you said you
Mhm.
contributed to that, some short stories. You want to talk about that one?
Well, yeah, there's a little story behind it. When I first submitted the Chronic card to an independent publisher, she said that it needed to be polished and whatever, and suggested that I join a writers group. So I joined several writers group, and this one particular writers group, they were mostly focused on short stories. So everyone wrote their short stories. We critiqued them, cleaned them up, and we just got the idea to publish them, to self-publish them. And so the book has like three of my short stories in them, including the very first story I ever had published. And and again, it's a great little book, but there's a lot of weird stuff in it, so I don't really push it that much. But what I did do, and I haven't even mentioned my fascination with radio back in the day, but what I did do, the short stories that are in that book, along with one or two others, I produced an audio series entitled Once Told, where I have actors, people reading those stories, with sound effects and whatever. And you can find that on my website also. I'm very, very proud of that.
So that sounds like a dynamic reading. So you have female voices, male voices, sound effects, perhaps even a sting of music every now and then.
Oh yeah, well, it's just the one reader, but there are special effects, and the reader might change, his or her voice, and
Okay.
there's music, and it's been compared to the Twilight Zone because all of the stories have sort of a twist ending,
Mm.
and it's the magic of the internet because one of the stories is read by a young lady who lives in London, whom I have never met. Another one of the stories was written by a young lady from Japan whom I've never met, and the story is read by the British actress. So
Wow.
it's a great series. I'm very, very proud of it.
And where can we find that?
Well, you can find it on my website, stevebellinger.com. If you go to the menu, you'll find Once Told. You'll also hear it on a Mutual Audio Network. It's a group out of Canada. It's audio podcasts, and what they do is they will host programs like this, pardon me, and radio drama, modern radio drama, which is something else I was into back in the 70s. I was actually a producer of radio drama. I'll tell you something that you may find a little surprising. Uh, when I was in college back in 1968, I heard the Orson Welles War of the Worlds for the first time.
Mhm.
You know what that's all
Oh yeah,
about, right?
very
Oh
much.
yeah,
Oh, yes,
and
I love radio drama. Love it.
oh well, I heard this and it blew me away. And I said to myself, what would a modern version of this be like? Well, 10 years to the day, I produced something called The Day of the Martians, where the Martians land in a suburb of Chicago and attack Michigan Avenue, done very similarly. And I've been told it's better than the original. I consider it to be my magnus opus. So, still. And you can find that on the Mutual Audio Network and on my website.
Okay.
So
Well,
I've done quite a few strange things, I guess, in my time.
well, I like it. I like that. I used to listen to a radio program in Montreal when I was a kid, and the continuing saga every Sunday night, I think it was, called The
Oh, yeah.
Fourth Tower of Inverness.
Mm,
And I looked it up on the web,
mm.
and there's some writings about it. So it definitely reached a lot of ears, including my young ears at the time, and I just loved it. And I wanted to do something like that. Never did, but
Mm.
maybe one day. Maybe you've
Well,
inspired me to do something like that.
it's never too late. I did I started what was going to be a series of comic detective stories.
Hmm.
And again, they're so focused with in terms of time and location that other people might not even get it. Um, they're in Chicago. There used to be, well, our subway system. One of the lines used to be called the Evanston Express. So I wrote a detective story entitled "Murder on the Evanston Express," and it was very popular. And there is a gentleman who calls himself Captain Radio that I met years ago, and he and his group was going to produce one of the scripts that I never got done, and it looks like it might still happen. So I tell people it's never too late. I had my first book published when I was 65. It's never too late, but don't wait until you're 65 if you can.
Sure, sure, sure.
So it's about having fun with all of this stuff, and
Absolutely.
and
It
and
is.
and hopefully other people enjoy it too. But even if they don't, I enjoy it. I enjoy doing it.
Okay. Well, you look like you've had a pretty good life. You're still working. You're past that age of 65 where you could have retired.
That's true.
Um, Now, in that case, what are sales like for your books? How much do you make it doing that?
Oh, not a whole lot. I mean, um, after something like this, there might be a little bounce in the sales when people will see it. And don't tell my publisher, I'm not that that concerned about sales because I'm a ways away from selling 1 million copies, which would make a difference. But I just want people to enjoy it. And I've made a few bucks, but I'm not going to retire from the money that I made
No,
there.
it's
What?
really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I like to do, I'm a little bit into like fandom. I'm a big Star Trek fan. On my shelf over there, I have this model of the Enterprise. I've got a little tiny TARDIS from Doctor Who, and I'm into things like that. So with the help of a guy who does 3D printing, I actually had a Chronocar made, and this is what the
Oh,
Chronocar
wow.
would look like. And this guy actually did it with the interior. I mean,
Oh,
he did a hell of
wow.
a job. And
Oh, that's great.
I've got another guy who did with Doctor Who. My favorite of the Doctor Who characters was Tom Baker. And there is a some artwork done that I commissioned with my character from the Chronocar confronting the Dr. Baker Doctor Who. So I guess I have just so much fun with this that I don't worry about sales. I mean, I should. And I do go to book events in Chicago. We have the Printers Row Book Fair every year, and I try to go there to sell a few books. But it is just so much fun creating these things. And again, I've got like maybe 70 or 80 reviews in Amazon, but they're all glowing. I mean, people who really got it and really enjoyed it. So, and I just would like for more people to get their hands on these books to enjoy them. Not so much for the money. I mean, yeah, I'd make a couple of bucks, but it's more important to me if someone comes back and says, I really enjoyed this book.
Yeah.
This was really fun. I really liked it.
Well, it sounds like you have success in that regard then. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think so.
You mentioned a publisher. So are you doing hybrid publishing then?
Well, one of the things when I first came up with the Chronocar, I old fashioned. I wanted to go the old fashioned route of publishing, and of course, that those days are almost over unless you're a big name. But I always felt that, of course, I could self-publish, and I was prepared to do so. But I'll never forget the first time my daughter brought home a book that was self-published by one of her friends. I couldn't get past the second page for the misspellings and the bad grammar,
Hmm.
and the fact is, part of what's damaged the whole publishing industry is that you can publish any kind of stuff. So I was able to find an independent publisher who put it through like 2 rounds of editing and everything else. I mean, the book is damn near perfect. And that told me that I have something of quality because they were willing to take the risk, of having a cover design and doing the editing. And so that's how it came about. Now that
Yeah.
company, it was a nonprofit, and they went out of business. And I found another independent publisher who picked it up, and who also published it as audiobooks. So
Hmm. Hmm.
they're not self-published, but they're independently published.
Well, what would be the difference then between independent publisher and hybrid publishing? Because
Well,
some
I,
people
I
refer to it as hybrid publishing.
well, I think with hybrid, I would think that I would still be somehow involved with it. But in this, my only involvement was with the editing. The editor would look at it, and I would get it back, and we go back and forth until we agreed on things.
Yeah.
But pretty much, they're working on putting the book together. I'm busy writing the next one.
Right.
Now,
Yeah.
the next book that I'm working on, I'm going to experiment with doing complete self-publishing. But again, that's going to cost me money because I got to pay for an editor. I got to pay for, and that's why I was trying to explain to some people. They would say, why go to a publisher? If you self-publish, you get to keep all the money. You also get to spend all the money too. When you go to a publisher, even an independent one, you know, um, they will pay for the editing and the book covers and everything with the hopes of making it back in sales.
Hmm.
I think with a lot of hybrid, they're still wanting to get money from you to help pay for
Absolutely.
some
Yeah.
of it, and
It's not,
yeah,
it's expensive. It can be expensive. Yeah.
exactly, and that's good, and I was prepared to go that route. But if a publisher thinks my story is worth the risk, that tells me I think I've done something here. That was a validation of sorts,
Yeah.
you know. And now with this next novel, the self-publishing is almost an experiment to see if I can do it, how it comes about.
Yeah.
Because the fifth book is totally different from the other four. No Chronocar or anything in it. And I did help my wife self-publish her book, so I've had a little experience with that.
Okay. Well, 40 years ago, I was very active in the music industry. As you
Hmm.
can tell, I still play.
Hmm.
And I did the route. We're trying to get a record company to take interest in me. That didn't happen. So then they were independent or indie labels. And I
Hmm.
thought about that. And being a bit of a control freak myself, I went for I made my own record label. And that was hard work, and then
Yeah.
promoting it and all. So I see a correlation between what I went through as a musician and what people are going through now for the last
Yes.
10, 15 years with publishing books and the choices they have. And
Hmm.
as you say, the larger publishing companies are virtually unapproachable, just like the
Yeah.
larger labels. I don't know how you could approach them.
Hmm.
There's a lot of similarity, definitely.
That's true. One of the things that I'm trying to do now is I wrote a screenplay for the Chronocar. I don't know how the hell I'm going to get anywhere with that. I've entered in some contests and I've gotten a little placement, but again, that's like breaking into publishing or the music.
Hmm.
But everyone kept saying this would make a great movie, so I
A
wrote a screenplay.
screenplay is a whole different way of
Oh,
writing. Did you have to
absolutely,
learn how to do that? And if you did, how did you
absolutely.
learn how to do it the right way?
Well, I am very good at self-teaching myself things. I self-taught myself to be a to write computer programming. So there are some books, a lot of things online. I learned the formatting, and I just did it. I
Hmm.
entered into a contest, got some feedback, fixed that up, and it's slowly getting better and better. It's I kind of have a knack for things like that if I really want to do it. And again, it's because it's a matter of the format is very different, and I watch a lot of movies, so I kind of get an idea about pacing or whatever, and I don't know. I think I'm just lucky sometimes.
Well,
Yeah,
there's your transferable skills. You can,
yeah,
your self-taught is a skill. And when
yeah.
you do it good, you can teach yourself all kinds of things.
Well, this is true. I
Yeah.
tried to get that across to young people. They're always asking me, Steve, can you help me? Can you help me? Well, sure, but no one helped me. I
Mm,
looked it up on my own.
cool.
So teaching it to myself and sitting in front of the computer and hacking it out until I finally get it right, it's very satisfying, and it does seem to work.
Okay. You told me in a email that you sent me,
Mhm.
back and forth, we talked quite a bit, and you wanted to know if we can get this out on YouTube for Black History Month in February. And so I said, yeah, we'll make that a reality. Do you want to speak to that and how your books can be a part of um, that month,
Sure,
that time period?
sure. Well, first of all, and my stories are all the main characters are well, they're diverse in that the main character is always black because he's based on me. The Chronicar is based on me when I was a college student going to IIT. Apocalypse is sort of based on me now. I'm not retired yet, but that character is retired. Um, it's not all black. It is diverse, but the main characters are black, and it's when you write a story, and if you don't specify the ethnicity of the main character, he becomes an everyman, which is pretty much Caucasian usually. I try to take a black character and just throw him into that situation. I tell people, it's not black science fiction. It's science fiction that happens to black people. It's um, ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. In this case, they happen to be black. If I were Asian, I would write it from that point of view. But I'm trying to get people to sort of normalize this and to read science fiction or any kind of a story that doesn't necessarily um, how can I say it? It's not necessarily there to teach a lesson in blackness, so to speak, but it's everyday life for a black person. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Hmm.
There's a tendency that this is Black History Month, so this must teach a history lesson. No, it is just a story. And what if it happened to me as opposed to you? And in every case, well, again, the Chronicle it does deal with prejudice and that historical thing because, for example, in Time Waits for No One, the young man goes back to the 1950s, not expecting to get into trouble when he drinks from a water fountain that has a
Right.
sign above it saying whites only, because the young people today don't understand that, as he didn't, and he got his butt kicked as a result.
Hmm.
And so there are some history lessons, but just a matter of I'll never forget when I'm a big fan of opera, and my daughter when she was very young walked in and I was watching the opera on TV, and Daddy, what are you watching? This is Wagner or whatever. And then I don't know if you know who Jessie Norman was. She was a black opera diva. Once she saw her, then in her mind, that's something else I could be.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you don't have to be a superhero. I mean, you can just be a regular person, white, black, or whatever, and experience the paranormal and experience time travel or get involved in the things that are happening. I'm not trying to teach a lesson. I'm just trying to tell these stories from a different perspective.
You say you're working on a new book. Is that going to be connected in some way, or is it going to be independent?
No, it's totally different. This new book
Okay.
is going to be a disaster movie. It's um, it's basically a story about the Earth's magnetic field going crazy and things that happen as a result. And again, a lot of research I'm doing in, and even though a lot of it is very unlikely, it's science fiction. I'll give you the title. It's going to be called Lines of Force: The End of the World as We Know It. How's that for a title? And
Yeah.
it I had a lot of fun writing it. I've got people doing beta readings and everything, and had to do a lot of research in earth science and things like that, so that
Yeah.
the science part of it makes sense, so that you can believe the science fiction part of it.
I have to do research for my books. I always find
Mhm.
that so much fun to do.
Oh
And
yeah.
when I was younger, I would go to libraries. I use the internet and very
Mhm.
carefully. I need to,
Mhm.
verify it 2 or 3 times through different sources to make sure that what I'm
Absolutely.
reading is true. But that's so much fun for me. Is it
Oh
fun for
yeah.
you as well?
Oh, absolutely. Because I'm writing a story and I'm trying to find scientific validation for some of the crazy things I'm doing. And then I realized that the science is wilder than the fiction that I'm coming up with. And it makes for the story it makes for the story being all the more interesting.
Hmm.
I you know we're, part of the story we're talking about things like the aurora borealis, and I discovered that there is a phenomenon called Steve, which has and that, it's an acronym, special emissions. I don't know, I had to look it up, but I mean, look up the term Steve in terms of atmospheric phenomena, and I was totally thrown back by that, and I made a point to include it in the story.
Yeah,
It's fascinating.
it is. Even minor things. I'll
Oh
give you
yeah.
give you an example.
Hmm.
I needed for one of my characters to accidentally fall asleep halfway up a cliff. He needs to get to
Hmm.
the top, but he's so
Hmm.
tired he just sits there and he falls asleep. And he wakes up when it's dusk, it's getting darker. It takes place in Georgia and
Hmm.
it's August.
Hmm.
And I needed to know what bird sounds woke him up. So,
Hmm.
okay, in
Hmm.
August at dusk in Georgia, what kind of
Hmm.
birds chirp? You know,
Hmm.
there's a website for
Exactly.
that.
Exactly. And
It's
it
very,
makes it all the more believable.
yeah,
And it
for
doesn't
sure.
hurt that you've done some mountain climbing, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah,
Yeah. So so again, your personal experience going into
yeah,
the story makes it all the more believable. And then if the reader is a mountain climber or who's interested in that, they will see that reality and make the rest of the story all the more believable and understandable.
yeah.
I, I've seen so many people write stories where they just write all of this crazy stuff out of their heads. But you do a little research, add a little reality, it just makes it so much more fun.
It is absolutely. Well, any final words you want to have to say?
Well, I want to invite people to, check out my books. My website is stevebellinger.com. My books are available on Amazon and all over the place, actually, and they're available as audiobooks, paperbacks, and as ebooks. I did want to mention the Chronicar. Very proud of it. It won the Best Indie Book Award, the Independent Authors Outstanding Science Fiction Award, and a Reader's Favorite Gold Medal Award. I mean, that totally blows me away, which tells me that I guess it has some value.
For
When I
sure.
won the first one, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, they're just giving these awards away, but it won two, three others. So, and again, I'm very proud of it. I would love to hear from people. Um, I'm sure you've mentioned more than once that we live and die by reviews.
Yeah.
If you read any of my books, please leave a review somewhere, even if it's a bad one. Please leave a
Exactly.
review, and I'd love to hear from people. Um, for those of you who are aware of it, are you familiar with the concept of Easter egg,
Mm,
like a hidden feature in
oh,
a
sure, sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. We actually
yeah.
use that term. That's why it sounded familiar in television editing. Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah, and it was very big in computer technology before
yeah.
9/11. They would hide little things in software. Well, I'll just throw out there that Apocalypse has an Easter egg that no one's ever found. So I would
Okay.
challenge people to get the book, read it, and if you can find the Easter egg, let me know. I should probably have
Okay.
a contest, maybe give something away if they can find it.
Excellent. Sounds great, Steve. It's been a real delight speaking with you and listening
Oh,
to
it was fun. It was fun.
the way that you write books, the way that you think is really great. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it probably scares a lot of people.
When you finish writing that next book of yours, you
Hmm.
should look me up and we'll have you on the
Absolutely.
show again. We'll talk some more.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This was
All
so
right.
much fun and I really appreciate it.
Okay. My
Thank you.
pleasure. You take care of yourself now.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you for watching. And before you go, if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. You can even leave a comment. All of that really helps in recommending this channel to a larger audience. And if you are an author, I would love to speak with you about your book. Until next time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.